dug up my NASA t-shirt from the cupboard. Um, let's welcome in the next host. Daniel, you could bring in Laura. Hi.
Hi.
Actually, this thing all started off being like, okay, since headquarters in Europe started asking us to curate Asia Pacific, it's like, okay, so everything is obviously convenient in this time zone, and thought it's like, okay, well, we just get people in this part of the world. But somehow it became a global event. I mean, literally, we have you guys in California and the US. Yesterday, we had Wingzi, who actually was speaking from Cartier, Paris. And then later on today, after this session, we actually have the UNDP coming in from New York City. So yeah, it's amazing, right? I mean, we think of the internet, I mean, with this situation as, we can't do things physically, but it's opened up a whole ability to do global events so rapidly. So just for give you guys a background, wow, time passes very, very fast, because I met Laura like in, I think 2012, because, it always starts with crazy people, right? So there was this crazy person in Colorado who started this thing called Unreasonable at Sea. And of course, it's unreasonable, right? So it had to be unreasonable. So he actually audaciously selected like 20 or 30, I guess, like not profit, but they were about impact technology startups and companies around the planet. And he brought them onto a boat, and the boat went around the world. And they stopped by Singapore for, I think, not even 24 hours. And, we put this really intense experience for them, getting them to meet the community. And that's, I think, the first time I met Laura. And I guess we haven't even seen each other physically since then, right? Is that correct?
No, but we knew each other. We knew each other way back in the dark ages of TED. Yeah. So Dave knows how to throw a party, doesn't he, folks? Yeah. He did a party for us in Singapore. So
I guess thankfully, I mean, in the early days of the internet, there's always email, and email is very, not so personal. You just see text. And to me, sometimes the biggest technology revolution is more the social internet, because once Facebook really took off in the early 2000s, you could see people's faces. You could actually behave more like a community and connect to people rather than over email. So I guess it's through that power that I guess we've always been so connected to the whole TED community and many other communities after that. And then we post stuff, so it's almost as if we haven't met for years and years and years, but yet we really kind of keep in contact daily and know each other. So the long story short, I mean, basically, I this whole thing is a very unlike TED, right? TED is like one headquarters, and they decide everything and they select. But Campus Party to me is much more ground up, much more community created and driven. So when this thing landed on us 3 months ago, I basically reached out to the entire community of people who we know through TED and Campus Party 2 years ago, and says, well, this is happening, and let's do this, because it's really for a good cause. All of it is in really support for the Doctors Without Borders. I mean, it's amazing, right? I mean, it's hard enough dealing with the pandemic in our cities. But these doctors, nurses, and staff of Doctors Without Borders, they actually go into the most harshest frontline countries and regions, and then they help people. And it's so remote to us in that sense, right? Because we can't even go down to the other side of town, and let alone to another place. But it's incredible to see some of these human beings really putting themselves out there to help others. Laura's going to host this new session, next session, and I'll leave the stage in her good hands. So see you guys later.
So hi everybody. I really wish I could see all of you. It would make me very happy to see a mosaic of people in all these countries. I'm excited today, and I brought some friends who know more about a lot of things than I do. But Space, I like to say space is the ultimate innovation lab, because innovation is such a buzzword. But if there's any place, any platform, any possibility for humans where we need everything that we can bring to it, our minds, our imaginations, our ethics, our space, interestingly enough, is maybe the ultimate petri dish of what it means to be human. But we'll talk a lot more about that. You can, Daniel, you can go ahead and bring Andy and Greg in. So just by way of framing this a little bit, we're going to have a conversation today about what it means, what it really means, not just the not just the science fiction that I love so much, but what does it really mean for humans to go into space? And, there's a conversation to be had about the exciting technologies and those opportunities and those challenges. There's a whole other set of challenges, which is about, are we going to colonize space better than we've colonized this planet? Are we going to leave the choices about who's in charge, who owns what, to the billionaires and the militaries and the countries? There's a lot of things to talk about, and frankly, the challenge is huge, and space is not someday anymore. I think we all are starting to see and maybe finally believe again, after a long lull of a bunch of really wonderful deep space exploration that is ongoing. We now believe, anyone who's paying attention, we believe we're going to get to Mars. I don't know if we can debate whether Mars is very useful, but we're going to go, and we're going to go sooner than you think. So I would ask you to start thinking about who makes the rules and who's going to, what are the jobs and all of that. So Greg Altry and Andy Aldrin, excuse me, Andy, have long careers in sort of all things space, but they have particular expertise in a reality check and in the promise of the commercial space sector. They've seen all the ups and downs, and they also very specifically, I'm going to ask them, this would be a good place to start. So they specifically understand about what these jobs and what the training to get ready for the careers that are coming. So let's start with that concrete kind of place. So you guys, we're talking to an audience of people all around the world, certainly, probably mostly not in the United States. And last I checked, last presentation I gave, there were 72 nations who have declared some form of a space program. So that obviously,
that's true. I think it's up to 80 or so now, but yeah.
So that doesn't mean that they're all lifting off things into space, but it means serious intent, right? And national pride and creating jobs and all sorts of things. So what I'd love you guys to give a few, just a little bit on what you see as the jobs that maybe, like, there's the obvious jobs. What are the jobs that maybe people aren't thinking about?
I guess I'll address that because I've been an educator for a long time, and I'm happy to teach a summer program with Andy, in fact, at Florida Tech, but normally I teach at University of Southern California. And I teach a technology commercialization class, which is packed full of engineers. And these are a diverse group of engineers, mechanical, electrical, some aerospace, from all over the world. They tend to come to my class because they know I have a long history of space expertise and I'm well connected in that industry. And they're excited that all sorts of different engineering can create jobs. Meaning there's a lot of software jobs, for instance, in space right now. There's a ton of data being generated and even more going to be generated by imaging satellites looking at the Earth with much higher cadence. When you look at Google Maps or Google Earth, you see a picture of your home. That could be 6 months old, 18 months old. You don't even know. But we're going to get that data every day at least. And analyzing that data and figuring out what that means presents all sorts of incredible opportunities for researchers, the people who write the code, to look at that big data, to use AI to ferret out what's important in those images that we don't see. Big opportunities. But outside of engineering, there's so many other jobs. There's jobs for business people, jobs for policymakers. We've got jobs for designers to make sure that finally spacecraft aren't a hostile psychological environments. I remember looking at the Orion capsule, NASA's deep space capsule, and it has that space engineer feel, right? And I thought, going to the moon in 3 days and back, that would be great. Going to Mars inside that thing, I think that the crew might kill each other if we don't think more about the psychological ramifications of that. And I'm confident the good folks at Lockheed and NASA will figure that out, and they're beginning to hire people who don't come from purely numbers backgrounds, who think about the way people think about spaces and the way people think about interacting with other people. So there's almost no domain, I think, that you couldn't maybe get a job in space right now. There are jobs for clothing designers to make spacesuits that look cool. You look at the recent SpaceX launch, Elon really, really went out of his way to make sure that those spacesuits looked cool, right? And to my knowledge, he hired people who had done a lot of great Hollywood films to help work with the engineers to make sure it was both practical and styling. So, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I like to remind people is that we oddly have a lot of experience and a lot of data on how humans function in extremely cramped quarters, right? So whether that's submarines or tunnels, mining, there's all kinds of experiences that we've had, but it's not optimal, right? So the understanding what it's like for a team, let alone a colony or a space hotel, to function for months at a time. So I call it the near space future, right? The arena I'm thinking of is the next 30 years, and I call it the near space, which is Earth to Mars.
That space hotel had better not look like a military submarine on the inside. That's all I can say.
So Laura, you raised a really good point. We actually at Florida Tech did a couple of workshops over the last couple of years looking at Mars habitation. And when you talk about Mars habitation, the numbers work out really quickly that you need to have kind of 100 people or so at a facility. It's kind of like Amundsen Scott at the South Pole. And so you're not going to get them all up in one trip or get them back in one trip. So they're going to be kind of a rotational thing. And since you only get to go there and come back every 2 years, you're going to end up spending a lot of time there. And so we put together a couple of workshops to try and understand this. What are the physiological, psychological, and sociological issues that come up? And the ones we really don't know are the sociological and psychological. We've been studying the physiological, and there are lots of difficult issues. But if you kind of lay out the degree of uncertainty on that and the state of knowledge, the ones where we really are uncertain are sociological and psychological. And you alluded to a few things, and you said they weren't optimal. I mean, there is no historical analog for going to Mars. I mean, you are literally 2 years away from a hamburger.
The closest that I'm aware of would have been long sea voyages 100 years ago, or the wintering in McMurdo, right?
Yeah, close. But the problem with those data sets is we don't really have much real data. I mean, the analog is good, but we don't have much data, and you can't unless you can go back in time.
Right.
Which we could do in Hollywood, but we really can't do it yet in reality.
It's just Bezos likes to point out Antarctica is paradise compared to Mars.
Yeah, it is.
But I want the audience out there to be thinking like, oh gosh, I'm not an engineer, so I don't get to be involved in space. But it's like it's going to require sociologists and teachers and designers and ethicists and all sorts of stuff. It's not just technology folks.
No, they're two different things, sort of. If you're on Mars, you're going to have all those skills. You're going to have to, everything you do on the Earth, you will have to do on Mars, and you'll have to do it better, smarter, and all of that kind of stuff. If we kind of come a little closer to today, the space business has been around for a long time, but it's in the process of being disrupted.
Yep.
And in the past, it was enough to be a great engineer, and you needed to have a few great accountants and things like that. And we were able to build amazing systems, but things have changed dramatically. So, as I grew up, it took 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build a space system. We're now building these things in months and for thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. But all of that has changed. The clock speeds are entirely different. The set of customers that you deal with, as I grew up, there were 3 customers in America. You basically you had the Air Force, you have the intelligence, and you have NASA, and there's commercial.
Right.
Now there are literally, if you go to Planet Labs or Planet, they are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of individual customers. The investment environment is completely different. Instead of just literally having a handful of investors, mostly out of the government, we have, investors at everything from angel capital, to institutional investment. So the skill set of just being a great engineer isn't enough anymore. To be a leader in today's world and tomorrow's world, you need to have a complete skill set. You need to understand the broader context. You need to understand the markets, probably more so than the technology. You need to understand the policy. You need to understand how to be a leader. And so these are the things that we're doing at the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, but it is going to be a completely different skill set to be a leader in space. And it's not the skills that are really critical and that are in demand and are just absolutely not out there aren't the technical skills, to be honest with you.
Okay, so let's pull that thread a little bit more. If you are listening to this from a nation that is not has a space program or an interest, or is a coalition of countries that are collaborating to have a space presence, other than mission, how can entrepreneurs or other players get involved in the commerce? So whether that's small sat or parts or software, like what are things that are a way to not be hampered by not being, part of ESA, part of the 5 or 6 countries that are putting the most capital into space right now? How can everybody participate? Like what are some things that small sat, but what else?
Yeah, well, like I said, software is a huge opportunity that anyone anywhere in the world can do. And Andy mentioned, Planet Lab has all these hundreds of customers, but the disconnect between simply seeing images of parking lots outside hospitals in China and what some folks at Harvard Medical School, what folks at Harvard Medical School did by counting the cars using software over time and determined that, hey, it was obvious the coronavirus was actually broken out in Wuhan back in September and October 2019 because you could see the cars piling up in the hospital parking lots. That was software, right? And the medical researchers and the software people had nothing to do with space. You don't have to be in a country that launches space. We don't need 80 different countries launching rockets. That's not going to be necessary. There needs to be a kind of competitive market there. But I think it'll end up being a little bit like the aircraft industry, where on the big aircraft side, you've got 2, you might end up with 3 competitors in that market. You're not going to have 80 different big lift rockets. That's not necessary, but everybody can run an airline. Everybody can get on an airplane and participate in that industry. And the excitement isn't building the aircraft. The excitement is taking them to exciting new places. So there's huge opportunities.
So there's a process going on right now that I call the democratization of space. I mean, as I grew up, if you wanted to go into space, you had to be an astronaut. Today, all you'd have to have is a fair chunk of money. In the future, you won't have to have a trip to space will cost as much as kind of an expensive vacation of a lifetime, but it'll be accessible to a much broader group of society. The other thing is, when you participate in space, again, in the world that really is up to today, you're working on programs that take tens of years and hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you start something, literally, if you're an undergraduate student and you start working on a mission, you're really lucky if by the time you finish your PhD that thing is launched. And today, things are happening much faster. I'll give you just a wonderful example. We're working with a school in northeastern England that has kids in this school. They're, I think maybe 14, 15. They're building satellites. Each one of those kids is actually building a satellite, and they're going to launch it. And it's being, that whole thing costs hundreds of dollars. I mean, it's like a little chip, but it has some functionality and it flies for a few weeks. But can you imagine the excitement that creates? Now you kind of take that a step forward, and this is why we've gone from 40 nations with space programs 5 years ago to I think it's almost 80 now. You know, it's doubled because it's so much faster, so much cheaper, and it's actually getting to the point where we're doing things better, faster, and cheaper and smaller, which I thought growing up, you can't do better, faster, cheaper. You can only do 2 of them. So it's an amazing period where so many people can participate in space that couldn't even think about it, you know, even 5 years ago.
Well, so to take that the next step, democratization of space, meaning, you know, representation really does matter. We're obviously facing a big soul-searching, wrenching, introspective phase here in the United States, long overdue. But it does lead to the question of who should be in charge. So one of the areas that is rarely talked about is law and space law. And there aren't that many dedicated programs to it, but, you know, demand one if that interests you, because somebody's going to be, I mean, there isn't quite a UN for space or a transhuman manifesto, but it, you know, you, the campus party audience, you get to say whether, sorry, puppy in the house. You get to say whether this is, who is running it? Who is, whatever we do in the next 20 to 50 years, as humans really do step out into space, if history is any guide, we'll follow those patterns potentially for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I feel like it's a really good time to rethink that, to look at what patterns we are letting by default take humanity out into space. So that's something to think about, and you can shape it, right? Because the technology is caught up to your vision, and it's up to you to chart a vision and demand that this is for everybody. This is going to space. There's a reason that pretty much every religion has looked up at the stars. Every culture at some point develops some mythos or version of astronomy. And so this crosses borders. So I want to go back to you guys and ask, what signs are you seeing? Talk about some of the collaboration, the surprising collaboration. I mean, there's the obvious security things but more in the science and the vision.
Well, you know, I think your rule of law thing opens up some questions that really have to be spoken to. Back in the 1960s, there was a treaty put together in a very 1960s way of looking at the world. It was a period of time of multilateralism. It was a period of time of, I would say, generally a bit of a socialist leaning. And so we signed a treaty called the Outer Space Treaty, which to a great extent did things like prevented territorial claims and private property claims in space on the moon and the asteroids. And, you know, there's a lot of kumbaya around that. And it did some great things like preventing weapons of mass destruction from being put into space.
It's amazing that it's worked. It's amazing it's worked this far.
Well, I think mostly because putting weapons of mass destruction into space is actually a lot more trouble than to believe that it's because the parties all chose to be compliant. And so far, nobody's had the opportunity to own these resources, but now people want to. And there's another group of people who say, yeah, that was completely misguided because it removes the primary motivation human beings have for going to new territories, which is to allow me to take some property and improve it, and thereby capture the value of the improvements I've made in order to resell that property. You can't do that under this domain. The United States has decided unilaterally to assert that if you extract materials, that you have the right to own them and resell them. And if you add value to those materials, that value belongs to you, the private firm. But there's still some debate going on. There's certainly a group of people who would like to run everything like Antarctica's run, which you could keep it pristine, but probably have no economic development. And there's people on the other side who want the Wild West, which is the reason I want to go to space. A lot of these libertarian thinking commercial space people is because I don't want a group of thousands of people around the world getting together to tell me how I can do it or what their vision is. I want to be left alone and go do my thing. So this is going to be a really interesting ideological battleground, and watching it play out will be really entertaining, at least over the next few years. But it's important, and people will think about both sides, and hopefully people can reach a compromise.
I'm not quite as cynical about the origins of the Outer Space Treaty. I mean, the Outer Space Treaty was created when the only actors in space were nation states, and literally at that point,
it made sense for the time.
There were two. There's the United States and the Soviet Union. It was created as a product of the Cold War, and I think it was Robert Heinlein who said that the Cold War created an artificial salient in space, and it's up to commerce to fill that artificial salient before it collapses. And we're kind of at that phase right now. I mean, in many ways, if you look at some of the government programs and our inability, particularly in the United States, to sustain, a pace of exploration, we're challenged in that respect. And, if there is true commercial activity in space, it will be self-sustaining. And so I think that's where we need to go. Then you have to look at that point, the Outer Space Treaty, and understand how is it still applicable in the future. And at some point in the future, it becomes an anachronism. I don't know if that point's now or later. My own personal view is kind of consistent with what Greg said. A good friend of mine who's a lawyer who works with undersea explorers has a T-shirt that said, where explorers go, lawyers follow. And I said, you need a postscript on the bottom that says at a respectable distance, because I mean, you don't legislate what you don't understand. And we sort of think we understand what the issues on the moon are going to be. We are gaining, unfortunately, a better understanding of what the issues have to do with space traffic management and debris in space. And those are just...
So I'm going to push you guys further. I think that we are barely, the existing infrastructure, right? Are thinking hard about these what I would say for space are near goals. We're thinking practical terms of low Earth orbit and getting a base on the moon, or doing whatever it is we're going to do on the moon, and then just get to Mars. But what about like in general? So I like to say that science fiction are thought experiments. The good ones, the really good science fiction, are thought experiments mostly about what it really means to be human. Like, what is the essence of being human, and who do we want to be? And we have those choices as we head on out. And so I think it's a lot more than the immediate practical. It's not enough to think about carving up the moon or even the near asteroids. It is like, let's think bigger, because it doesn't cost anything to have the thought experiment. And if we don't start having it now, then we have a space life by default. So a scenario that I can see happening is in the future that will affect our audience, are a combination of people who are, belong to different militaries and civilians, who are working and based in that band of space for extensive periods of time. Who's in charge of them?
Yeah, so rule of law is really critical. And if we want to have economic success, which is necessary in order to have people sustainably living in space, it doesn't work if it's just going to come out of the taxpayer's budget. We're going to send a few people into space every year like we do, and rich countries will be able to do it, and that's how it'll stay. But once it gets to the point where it's economically reasonable and attractive to send people to space because they do something that creates value other people are willing to pay for, then it works. But you've got to have rule of law. So that begs a big question. If there's no territorial domain allowed on the moon, for instance, and a private operator from the United States and a private operator from Europe and a private operator from Latin America and one from Africa are all operating in the same area, and there's a conflict, who adjudicates that, right? And if there's an adjudication, who enforces the compliance with the adjudication? And that just doesn't exist right now. So in my mind, and I think in some people's mind, allowing territorial claims for sovereign nations makes the nations actually responsible. Whereas right now they're responsible nominally for anybody who theoretically comes from their country who takes an action on the moon. But in our world of multinational corporations, and if you look at science fiction films like Aliens, I think that's prescient. Is the corporation really responsible to government, or is the corporation a government all on its own? I don't know. Is Apple an American company? They don't have many jobs in the United States, and they keep their money in Ireland to not pay U.S. taxes, and their investors are from all over the world. So it's almost hard to say that if they had an action on the moon that the U.S. should be responsible. So it's not, and that needs to be worked out before you can have successful commerce.
So I'm not. I think I'm going to stick with my statement where explorers go, lawyers follow. And I mean, we have in the United States and the UK and a few other countries a wonderful way of evolving legal systems to keep up a little bit behind, right? Because lawyers should follow. And it's just called developing customary law, right? And it's law based on precedent. And I think
but that's the key, and I agree with you completely. And but I keep just personally been internalizing, what would it have looked like if the group of Western European countries that spread out around the world and colonized like crazy over in a burst? What if there was some sort of context to ask what happens next? To do the thought experiment of how these things could go, right? I don't feel like we have a forum for that. And I feel like this audience could demand that unintended consequences are better thought out, right? And so, I have lots of opinions, but I want to put it out there that, if we're not careful, we will have the space vision of 5 or 6 billionaires. We all know who they are, or of 6 main countries driving and everybody else keeping up, trying to supply those 6 countries, or the brilliant engineers and scientists who are going to get us there, but not thinking about all the unintended consequences about what it means to be human and to go from there to form new civilizations. Right now we're so focused on the sheer achievement and challenge of the moon and Mars, and I'm saying that's small potatoes. Let's think bigger and then design systems now, because once the cat's out of the bag, it'd be very hard to put it back.
I think that having conversations and developing kind of a broadly shared set of values with respect to what happens in space is a useful thing to do, but we shouldn't delude ourselves that that's going to be more than it's just going to be kind of a societal force. It's not going to be a forcing function. It's going to establish kind of shared values and expected norms. It's not there is no enforcement mechanism that comes with shared values other than just
I don't know.
Condemnation, but it's a good thing to do because it will kind of shape thinking. But I think we've kind of tried the notion of letting nations go out there and establish it. It hasn't been that bad. I mean, we haven't totally destroyed space, and we've avoided nuclear war, which is a remarkable thing for humanity, to actually create nuclear weapons, build thousands and thousands of them, and not kill ourselves. So, I mean, give us some credit. But I think it's a great thing to do. But I guess I get worried when you start taking that conversation the next step and saying, well, yeah, what we need is just a world space governing organization.
No, I didn't say that. I said we need.
I know the conversations quickly get in that direction. And the challenge is, it's just that kind of, it flies in the face of human behavior. And what I tell my students is, if your business plan requires changing human behavior as the first step, you need a new business. So I think it's a good conversation to have, and it will happen more so now because, as I said, the democratization of space, because you're going to have kids in elementary school literally working with spacecraft,
Right.
and so that'll change everything.
To Greg's point about, there's the obvious category of engineers, but the huge ongoing opportunity of software. No matter how you access space as an industry, as a vision, you can ask those questions on the teams you're in, no matter where you are. Ask, how can we make it, something that will be useful and delightful and reaffirming for generations to come? Like what could the consequences be? Those are things you can bring into your own team planning, no matter what aspect of this. So Daniel and Dave, I don't know if there are any questions. We'd love to hear them, or if you guys have some for us. But what do you guys think is the thing that has surprised you the most in the last couple of years in the commercial space sector, like of things going next step?
The amount of mainstream investment going into commercial space up until the moment the coronavirus crisis occurred actually surprised me. And somebody posted on Twitter a couple of days ago about people didn't really understand space, and I pointed out that the people that didn't understand the risk of investing in space come in two categories. They're either ignorant or delusional, and we need both of those groups in order to get this done.
I'm fighting that. I want people to be smart.
Yeah, but then they wouldn't invest in this.
So what surprised me, Laura, is how quickly this transition has happened. It surprised me. I mean, 5 years ago, I was a dinosaur, right? And I'm now a small furry mammal, and that evolution happened really, really quickly, and that's been hugely surprising. And it's kind of, a lot of it has to do with, frankly, I'm no SpaceX lover, to be sure, but I think Elon Musk and SpaceX have demonstrated that there's a new and better way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And I think they've got a little bit of work to do on it, but still they've demonstrated it. And what's really surprised me is how quickly the rest of the world, and even the kind of traditional space world, has come to accept all of this stuff very quickly. And that's been remarkable. And it's super, super encouraging.
Yeah, Elon absolutely deserves credit for inspiring a whole new generation.
Absolutely.
And a not so new generation.
my students know about that. I have to tell you the truth. When I do a poll in my class, they know what a Falcon 9 is and what a Dragon capsule is and what Starship is, and they don't know a lot about the mainstream space program hardware at all, because Elon's a master at getting his message across.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's a one-horse race at all. The traditional companies have amazing resources, history, and they've done a great job in reacting, and particularly United Launch Alliance, SpaceX's biggest competitor, and somebody Andy used to work for, I think, Troy Brown, who's the CEO of the company. He's got a vision just as big. He's very practical. He's an interesting guy, and what they've done with their company and becoming not reactionary, but adaptive and dynamic in a disruptive environment strikes me almost the way that IBM managed to survive the shift to microcomputing.
It is. I mean, I left ULA just as the transition happened, but it was breathtaking. I mean, literally, the entire leadership team changed out in the space of about 2 or 3 years. And I think one of the remarkable things is you've got a very, very conservative customer in the Air Force and intelligence communities, and they struggled with this. I don't think, it was a tough thing for them to put up with, but Tory knew that he had to do this. And it was remarkable. I mean, it's like rebuilding the engine of a car while you're driving 100 miles an hour around a turn. It just remarkable.
And you know what's even amazing, Andy, is even the customer, even the DoD, maybe not so much intelligence, but DoD and NASA in particular, they're really getting with the program. And
they are now. They are now. And that's one of the things that I'm just I am amazed and really encouraged by, is the fact that the whole community is getting it now. And there was a crisis, to be sure, because if you look at major space programs that we had undertaken, particularly NASA, more of them were canceled than actually got through by a huge margin. And we haven't been getting it done. I think we've still got a lot of work to do.
So speaking of NASA, I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out. One of the great honors of my life is to be a NASA data-naut. But I want this audience to know that it's a global program. Any of you can apply, and I'm not a data scientist. I think of myself as a data activist, but I am clearly deeply a space nerd. But there are artists and data scientists and policymakers and all kinds of people around the world who are part of this community and have access to all kinds of things. And ESA has a very different set of programs. So NASA doesn't help you be in the space business unless you're further along, and then you can be a vendor or a contractor. ESA actually is very invested in helping you start space-related businesses. So there's a lot of resources, workshops, and business support that is extraordinary that we don't have access to here in the United States.
I was out at Harwell, England, meeting with the ESA folks a few months ago, and I was thoroughly impressed with what they're doing there and the practicality of it, and just frankly giving money to startups. In the United States, we do have something similar. It's not at NASA, it's over in the Air Force and in the military. And so the Air Force had a really great event that I was proud to participate in last year, where they had a business pitch competition, and they basically had an Air Force credit card on the stage, and they swiped money right into the accounts of a bunch of startups, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Defense Innovation Unit out of Moffett Field up in California is a group whose job it is to connect with the Silicon Valley sort of startup community. And this actually includes some international folks too, and bring things to market that the U.S. Defense Department feels they need. They've been really innovative that way. Japan and the UK are making great leaps in these directions as well. I'm excited about what's happening all over the world. But that attitude you mentioned, Denise, is spreading.
Sorry, losing power here.
Yeah, I was wondering, something I've never done in an interview before.
NASA's SBIR group does similar things. What NASA's done with Flight Opportunities is pretty exciting. If you're not familiar with that program, they'll take your payload and basically pay to put it on a suborbital flight on a number of vehicles, such as Virgin Galactic Spaceship Two or Blue Origin's New Shepard. They've done a bunch of flights on Blue for microgravity experiments, and they'll just give you the flight if you qualify. You can get stuff up to the International Space Station through the ISNL if you've got a great experiment that they think will have an economic return, and you might get a free flight up and free down mass back if you can convince them it's a good deal.
We have a great question here, near and dear to my heart. I started out way back when in commercial solar. Rachel asks, how will space exploration further our solar energy capabilities in the future? I think that's a really interesting, so that's an example of an industry, right? We think of solar as panels on your roof, but it's so much more.
Let me hit that, and it also plays into a comment Vivian Lim just left online about what do you think is crucial to focus our resources on sustainability on our current planet or spend on space exploration. And that is a false choice.
Is a false choice.
Yeah, I have an article I wrote for Foreign Policy. I think I gave Daniel the link if he can post that. I'd love to get that up there. But it is a false dichotomy. The only way, and Jeff Bezos has been the best spokesman for this, to save the planet Earth is to get a lot of things that we do now on the Earth off the Earth. So these extractive industries and heavy manufacturing that create pollution and disrupt the national environment to begin with, if you can do those on the moon and the asteroids, you really take a load off the Earth. If you can eventually take, like Bezos wants, millions of people off of the planet, you can turn it into what it should be, which is a pristine biological environment, the national park of our solar system. Now, solar power is a great example. There's a lot of people on Earth who are frankly under the delusion that we're going to convert to solar power and get rid of greenhouse gases and other pollution. That's nonsense. The process of making the solar panels is highly, highly destructive to the environment. Nobody wants to talk about where those rare earth elements come from, or the fact that we're making them and shipping them all the way across the Pacific Ocean from Asia to North America at a great environmental impact. Then they only really last 15 years or so. They are not, quote, sustainable forever. Landfills are actually filling up with windmill blades, and this stuff doesn't work at night. Night is a real thing, folks. The night is dark, and it is not full of batteries. There are not enough batteries on Earth to run that. So if you get the solar panel in space, you solve the problem, because you've got 7 by 24 power. You've got a lot more efficiency because you have no atmosphere to block it.
What about
that power down to where you need it? And no greenhouse gases, but you've got to make those panels in space for it to make sense. Andy?
You do. I mean, that's the one thing about space-based solar power is we've been talking about this for 20 years at least, and it doesn't make any sense until you build it in space.
For the larger goal. Now, for small applications, in order to prove it, it makes a lot of sense, again, for the military. And I think you'll see the U.S. military. I think you'll see the Chinese go after this. There are good reasons to be able to power remote operating bases, for instance, with solar beam power to ships at sea and other remote locations, for instance, beaming power down to the moon makes sense.
I like to think that you're starting to see it in the exoplanet discussions of thinking of non-carbon based life forms. Just what does it even look like? What could life possibly look like if it was based on other fundamental chemistry? And I think there's an opportunity in that same way if we expand our minds a little bit and think about energy, right? Some of the things that, the long held dream of fusion and there's just things that could possibly be attempted, or the extreme pressures or the opportunity of the different manufacturing environment. So it's sort of a rambling answer to your question, Rachel, but I think we all think that powerful solar, focused solar in many permutations in the space, the foreseeable space of this next 30 years is going to be massive, because you simply can't carry enough fuel to do all the things that you need in an ongoing sense. So. But I think it'll go much farther than that. I'm personally really intrigued with the whole idea of origami. These compact things that can then pop up and down, kind of like tube worms, and make benefit of the orbital trajectory and things like that.
Well, so I mean, there's a lot of things here that kind of come up with this conversation. One is, just the sort of economic truth of it is, so the United States spends more as a nation than the rest of the world combined, but still, you wrap it up and it's about $50 billion out of a $20 trillion economy. Right. It's a tiny, 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 tiny fraction. So even if you took everything we were spending on space and doubled it, and then devoted all of that to green technologies and were phenomenally efficient with how you spent the money, it wouldn't be enough to make much of a difference, to be absolutely honest with you.
Well, I think one of the things that she's driving toward is what are the opportunities to put, right? Like, if I call this session Space the Ultimate Innovation Lab, because so much, I think it's where everything that we are and do and know is brought to the fore for the creative problem solving and existential question of going into space. But it also, 30 things in the room I'm sitting in, whether the materials or the power sources or the transistors, like so much of our everyday lives in one way or another came from the space program. Or these large, and I just can't say it enough. I want people to at least consider that it was just getting started. This is toddler time. We are toddlers, small furry mammal. Yeah, but now we're toddlers, and we can walk, and we can see it, we can taste it, and humans are nothing if not relentless, and so. Things are going to happen fast, and so ask hard questions. Push it. If energy and green tech are your thing, then push it into being part of the conversation about space. Right? How are these stations really going to run? They're not going to look or be sustainable like the ISS, right? Which is not really sustainable, right? What is it going to look like when there are hundreds or thousands of people? What are they going to eat? What are the resources?
If you want to talk about technology spinoffs,
yeah.
Let's talk about living on Mars, because you don't have any choice but to be self-sustainable, biologically self-sustainable on Mars. It costs roughly $1 billion to get a ton to Mars. You can't ship your stuff. You can't ship your hamburgers there. You're gonna have. First of all, you're gonna have to eat tofu. All right, get used to it. But you're going to have to do everything there. The technologies that we're going to develop, the sustainable technologies we're going to develop, and learning how to live and work and survive on Mars for long periods of time will be absolutely breathtaking, because you're going to have to think about things in completely different ways. And, one of the other things that's interesting about Mars, a couple of times you said, who's in charge? And, when you go to Mars, you're going to be a Martian. You're not going to be American, Russian, European, or even Chinese. You're going to be a Martian, and you're going to have to deal with your home country, so to speak. Vivian has a question. How can we encourage more women in the field?
Oh, yes, thank you. Well,
so let me start by telling you, women are coming into this field. So we mentioned the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, and if we could get that website up, that would be great. Last year was the first year we ran the Center for Space Entrepreneurship program. More than half of the students in the class, and I think I believe that these are the people that are going to become the leaders in the future. More than half of the people in the class were women. And so they're coming into the field, and I think, the place where we don't see women coming in, and it's something that that has to be dealt with, and maybe Greg has some ideas, because it's a tough environment, is in the startup community. There are very few companies in the space industry that are being started by women. And
first of all, let me make a big plug for the Brooke Owens Fellowship. I gave Daniel a link there if he could post it. This is a group specifically dedicated to solving this problem, founded by Lori Garver, former NASA Deputy Administrator in the Obama administration, and Will Pomerantz, who's runs Virgin Orbit for Richard Branson. They've done a really, really, really great job of creating not just a kind of educational system, but a system that connects young women with mentors that are really highly placed in the field. Because one of the biggest problems bringing any minority group into an industry is just those connections that you make socially. So many people are in the space field, I find out, because their dad was in the space field. And he took them to work and showed them the cool stuff. There might even be somebody, say, in this conversation right now whose dad was in the space industry, and that's why he ended up there. I don't know.
I didn't. I actually didn't intend to begin the space industry. It was an accident, honestly.
It's a great way to get there, right? And these young ladies, they don't have that connection. So this breaks that connection. It pairs them one-on-one with top-level mentors. People like Tori Bruno, we just mentioned, the CEO of ULA, is a mentor for a young lady. And Andy mentioned the lack of female startup founders. This is a problem in tech broadly.
Yeah.
Interesting. The space industry is really open. I swear, it is a white male, older guy dominated field. And here I am. Here's Andy. We want to fix that, don't we, Andy?
We do.
Boring, right? So anything we can do, anywhere you're out in the world and you're different in any way, female or what have you, please come join our team. We want to help. We get you excited about, Laura. I'm glad you're here. But it is a problem. I don't think it's because the field is restrictive or wants to keep people there, but this network has to be broken. And we have a responsibility, each of us, to try to find ways to break that network. There are some exciting companies. Barbara Belvisi, who's founded Interstellar Labs, I'm happy to be on her board. They're building a Mars habitat in Mojave with the eventual intention of creating biosphere domes that can be built on the moon or Mars, testing them out here on Earth.
So these guys are absolutely right about the power of community, but because space as an idea, science fiction as a playground, and sciences as an extended set of fields, there's a lot more space clubs, space community activity, sort of sky watching. There's more in the sort of in between than you probably realize. You don't. Your dad doesn't have to work at NASA. You don't have to be in a certain place to get involved. LinkedIn and the rosters of the folks who you might want to follow, reach out to folks.
So
right?
there are just a number of really, really great global organizations for young professionals. Space Generation Advisory Committee, Students Exploring and Developing Space. What else is there, Greg? I mean, they're on.
There's like National Space Society, the Mars Society, the Planetary Society.
That the university you're watching this from has a space club. Like you haven't met them yet, but there's going to be 30 or 100 or 300 people on your campus that are intrigued too and are asking some of these questions. And I promise, not everybody's an engineer. I mean, nothing wrong with engineers.
When we get through the pandemic, make a point of attending one of these great international conferences that are out there. So many good conferences. The Space Foundation puts on an excellent event in Colorado every year. The IAC has an event somewhere in the world. The National Space Society has an event usually in North America somewhere that's really good. Get out there and network with people. You'll be amazed who you'll meet, and they'll take the time to talk to you.
There's also another great network, which is through the International Space University.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is a really, really interesting educational institution that does nothing but space. They're global. They travel around the world in search of intelligence, and they've got a network of tens of thousands of former students. I'm one of them. And in fact, our center is affiliated with ISU. So that's another great network. There are tons of really, really great networks out there.
And just one last rah-rah for NASA data knots. It's mostly women. You know, it is mostly women because they started out by really working hard to find and bring in women, and then women invited other women. It's not limited to, men are welcome to join too, but it is overwhelmingly female, at least now. There's only about 300 of us, so please join. Yeah. Well, let's see. Oh, great question. What role do we foresee AI playing in space exploration and technology? You guys take this away as we're sort of rounding out in our.
Yeah, let me jump on one aspect of it that I think is really important, because I think it's where amazing things are going to happen. So right now and Greg alluded to this, we've got companies that are putting out hundreds of spacecraft that are going to be doing Earth observation. Planet already has hundreds out there. There are going to be hundreds more doing all kinds of really interesting data gathering, not just in single spectral bands and hyperspectral bands, radars, and all of this data is going to be ubiquitous. At the same time, we're also developing constellations of thousands of spacecraft that are going to provide instantaneous communication. At the same time, we've got synthesis of global positioning data now with, I think there are 5 position, navigation, and timing systems out there. The AI is going to come in the process of integrating all of those data streams. It's some called data lakes. It's literally a data ocean. But the real magic isn't just processing the data and doing something incredible with it. It's getting it to the customer. And that's where I think everybody that's out there watching this has an appreciation for where they come from. There will be Earth observation products that we can't even imagine today that are going to synthesize all of this data, that are going to do something amazing for you and the people in your community. And you have to figure out how to get that out, because it's not going to be the satellite designers. They don't know. I mean, don't send a guy from Silicon Valley to Nebraska to try and sell information. It just ain't going to work. So I think that's one place where AI has a great opportunity. I think Greg's got a few of his own too.
Yeah, I mean, you look, for instance, at the recent wildfire disasters we had in Australia, and we have those routinely in California, where I'm from. Imagine if you could look at those fires from space every hour and then apply an AI algorithm to learn something about the way that, that they grow and spread and how to identify them and put them down quickly. I think that, I don't know what the answer is, but I suspect that AI would learn things that we don't see when we're on the ground inside the box trying to fight those fires. And if we just use these tools to look at pictures and hand them to human beings to analyze for strategy for fighting them, we won't really learn the bigger picture about how they are as almost organisms, and AI can do that. So that's just one example. Agriculture, huge opportunities for AI to look at the way that agriculture around the world is working efficiently. In my state, we're really concerned about water. Are we irrigating well? You could look at hundreds of different fields in the California Central Valley and analyze which ones are doing well in different spectrums, and reach some interesting conclusions.
See, and I think it's the opportunity. So if the supercomputer can beat the chess master, but nobody can beat the chess master combined with the supercomputer, I think that's what it's going to be like for humans and their AI companions heading out into space. They're not just going to augment us. It's not just going to be amazing scaled computation. It's not going to be another consciousness. It's going to be this symbiosis of creative problem solving and incisive. The human brain is still the most amazing supercomputer we can imagine, but we're starting to see where it could go with AI, and the sheer scale of the calculations and the observational data inputs and space is a huge opportunity.
You're right.
Yeah, we're being asked to wrap it up. Thank you all. Please let us hear from you. We want to join you on this journey. All right, Dave, are you coming back? There he goes.
Hi again. Yeah, I guess these things sort of like you can probably have a whole day and even more about talking about this, because it really just expands the human imagination and spirit and energy, right? So let me wrap up by saying, like, before we got into this thing, like, we have a huge community here in Asia Pacific. We know a lot of each other through TEDx and Campus Party 2 years ago. So just drop me an email or whatever, and whatever you want, right? I mean, basically the entire purpose of life is to connect people with good intentions with people with good intentions, and that's it. that's our role and mantra in life. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
this
us.
morning.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
See you.
Bye.